Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Tonight, I have the honor, privilege, and pleasure of being joined by my brother, my friend, my murshid, my Shaykh, Shaykh Wahid Azal of the Nur Fatimiyya Sufi Order for part 22 in a series of our dialogues and conversations. I'm so honored to have Shaykh Wahid Azal back, and we will talk about a variety of subjects. So hand it over to the Shaykh. Nur alaikum, and thank you so much.
Wa alaikum nur, and first things first, Eid Mubarak to everybody who was fasting for Ramadan. It is now officially the month of Shawwal. I had a relatively easy time because I prepped myself months in advance because I've been intermittent fasting since January 1. So, going for the hours of fasting for Ramadan was very easy. I just switched the hours of when I was intermittent fasting to make it a complete 17-hour fast each day. So it was easy. I prepped myself, but it was a good fast this year. As those who followed the recommendations I make, my own crew, I got everybody to recite the Dua Joshan.
Yeah.
Joshan Kabir, the prayer of the greater steel coat of mail, which is in my opinion, is the ultimate dua that we have, especially since it invokes 1,001 names of God in it.
Mm-hmm.
And lot of interesting downloads I had just by this exercise alone during the 30 days. It was although I started reciting this about 10 days before, so it came to 40 days as of yesterday. And before it, as I had announced that, we would begin a course shortly, a very slow, methodical course in a text. And I chose Ibn Arabi's Fusus Al Hikam, the Bezels of Wisdom, because I thought about this for a very long time. This is a text that I have been reading and going back to and contemplating, meditating on consistently for about 30 years amongst some of the other texts. And it's actually a text, in my opinion, that is very much a parallel in many ways, for me at least, maybe for not other people, but for me, it parallels in a lot of its intentionality, the same intentionality that you find in the Bab's Kitab al-Asma, the commentary on the Surah of Joseph.
Yes.
Both of them push the boundaries of what received orthodoxy is to the breaking point. One in a form of a very didactic teaching, Ibn Arabi's Fusus, with the other, the Qayyim al-Asma, being a veritably, I don't know how you would define it, but a veritable Quran reproduced out of the text of the Quran itself as a form of commentary. Both are ecstatic in their own way, although with Ibn Arabi, his language and his intention, his focus, and his method in the Fusus is more methodical, although the logic is all over the place, as most people realize after reading it after a few pages. And these texts, in a sense, both of these have sort of nourished me, but with Ibn Arabi and the Bezels of Wisdom especially, there's a focus in this text that I think is very important for people who call themselves occultists in its Islamic context. And that is for a very specific reason. I have observed over the last 3 years since we've had this list that is almost now 10,000 people on it, the Islamic theurgy and white sorcery list, that by and large, the vast majority of them, especially Muslims that come there, have no real grounding in understanding what theurgy even is. So even though the culture is saturated with the occult, and the acceptance of the magical universe is a given in this culture, but the more theoretical, and I mean theoretical in the sense of Aristotle's notion of theoria, as a contemplation, there is no grounding in this. These people don't really adequately understand what it is that they are engaging with. Part of this has to do with the fact that, within Islamic cultures, whether natively in its own region or even in immigrant cultures, some of the assumptions that may have existed maybe up to about 100 years ago are no longer present. And so, whereas I would say until the modern period, the shadow of Ibn Arabi hung even within the mundane level of everyday culture in the Islamic world. As of modernity, and because of the rise of puritanical movements and Wahhabis and Salafists and etc., and even amongst Shia, this whole Wahhabizing tendencies that you have amongst 12 Shias in the form of the Maktab al-Tafkif and its predecessors, to approach even the mundane element of life from the more mystical and theosophical is no longer a given. Add to that then the influence of secular modernity and capitalism, essentially, that has transactionalized and optionalized the mentalities of everybody in the current zeitgeist. And so when people then approach the occult, right, in a sense, they are lacking a very important context to understand what the occult is, through no fault of their own. Unfortunately, the Sufi orders, the contemporary Sufi orders who have a responsibility in teaching and transmitting these sorts of texts that exercise such an important, intellectual influence within the milieu of these subcultures, no longer do so. So you're very hard pressed in the West, especially, to find, for example, a Sufi order that is teaching, the text of the Fusus Al Hikam, including in the West the Naqshbandis, especially the Haqqanis who don't engage with any of this stuff, even though the Naqshbandiya, the greater Naqshbandiya order, was engaging with Ibn Arabi from the very, very beginning. For example, one of my favorite commentaries on the Fusus Al Hikam is a Persian commentary by a companion of Khaja Bahauddin Naqshband. This was Khaja Muhammad Parsa, an Iranian from I believe he was from Bukhara, who was a companion of Bahauddin Naqshband, the founder of the Naqshbandi order. And his commentary, in my opinion, is one of the best commentaries on this text. I've read pretty much everything that has been printed and available, whether in printed form or manuscripts of these commentaries. And long ago, I decided that I was going to, just like I, basically shunned the Berhatiya conjuration oath out of my life after using it for such a long time, I began to, push away the commentary tradition of Ibn Arabi himself in understanding the Fusus Al Hikam, because as anybody who has especially read the first 4 major commentaries on these are the commentaries of Jandi, Kashani, Qaisari, and Faraqani. These commentaries become extremely obtuse and obscure. The kind of animated impulse that you find when you engage with Ibn Arabi himself on a raw level, when you're reading the text itself, and then really trying not only to follow his non-dualistic logic in this text and to understand the method behind the proverbial madness of his type of Quranic exegesis, which is, beyond anything that most Orthodox people would accept as proper. And when you do that, when you engage with Ibn Arabi himself, right, it becomes very similar to engaging with the text of the Quran for yourself, outside of everybody else's interpretation of what these verses mean, because you have the same sort of very amorphous, non-dual logic happening with the Quran, within the Quran itself. And I would posit that one of the reasons for the manner in which Ibn Arabi's own very weird, kind of non-dualistic logic in the text of the Fusus Al Hikam mirrors the same one that you find in the Quran itself. These things are known, people have commented about it, but to then glean the meanings for oneself out of engaging with a text such as this is something else. There are a lot of things with Ibn Arabi's details of things that he says that I fundamentally disagree with, many of them. But that's irrelevant, because as he says himself at the very beginning of the Fusus, you take the details in the whole, right? So even if you disagree with the details, as long as you start to glean the principle of what is motivating him here in this text, one can come away with a lot. And this is why Ibn Arabi became especially beloved in the Shia world right away, whereas he was, even a few generations after his life, he was still controversial largely in the Sunni world, although there were many Sufi orders that respected him and followed his perspective. But among Shiites, 12 Shiites especially, immediately they latched onto Ibn Arabi's teachings, because the kind of stuff that Ibn Arabi details, and especially in a text such as the Fusus Al Hikam, very much resonated with the very earlier pristine Shiism of 12 Shiism, before the mullahs got in there and just completely turned it into a dog's breakfast, especially in the early hadith collections where you have, this notion of high imamology, where the imam, basically becomes the successor of the prophet as the God man. With these wonderful hadith that exist in collections such as the Basair al-Darajat of al-Qummi, or Kulaini's, even al-Kafi, etc. So once this happened, you have almost an immediate, rejuvenation or efflorescence of a Shiite Akbarianism within the Muslim world, and especially the Eastern Muslim world, where you have such eminent figures such as Sayyid Haydar al-Muli and his near contemporary Hafiz Rajab Bursi, who are writing these texts, engaging with Ibn Arabi. And for his part, Rajab Bursi especially revived this extremely ecstatic high imamology and theophanology through the prism of Ibn Arabi, by taking some of the earlier extremely theopathic traditions and sayings of the Imams, and then reinterpreting them in light of the philosophy of Ibn Arabi. Sayyid Haydar al-Muli did exactly the same thing. He apparently, Sayyid Haydar al-Muli also composed the longest known commentary on the Fusus Al Hikam. Unfortunately, the full commentary has been lost. Only the introduction remains, which was edited and published by the late Osman Yahya and Henry Korban back in the late 1960s as the Nas al-Nusus. And they also published another one of his works, which is a sort of a Shiite Akbarian, commentary and work, independent work, called Jami' al-Asrar, Manba al-Anwar, the compendium of secret, and the Jami' wa Manba al-Anwar, the wellspring of the lights. And in there, Sayyid Haydar al-Muli himself, treats a lot of these Imami hadith from the perspective of Akbarian philosophy. Haydar al-Muli was also he loved Ibn Arabi very much, but also argued with Ibn Arabi very openly. And you see this particularly in that introduction of his to his commentary in the Fusus, where the whole issue of the seal of saints, the Khatam al-Wilaya or Khatam al-Walaya, depending on where you put the voweling, which is such a central notion in Ibn Arabi's overall soteriology and philosophy. Whereas for a 12er Shiite like Sayyid Haydar al-Muli, that label and that title and that station can only belong to the Mahdi, to the 12th Imam. Within the text of Ibn Arabi itself, this is a little bit more ambiguous, because in some of his earlier writings, he talks about this Khatam al-Awli or Khatam al-Wilaya, the seal of saints, as being somebody else. And then later, there is a strong suggestion in his work, beginning with his Kitab al-Gha Muqrib, the fabulous Griffin, that he himself was the seal of saints. And among Sunni Sufis, this is still accepted, that this is a station that Ibn Arabi claimed for himself. But with 12er Shias, this becomes a little bit more controversial. Now, where this becomes interesting for me is and how it parallels the claims of the Bab, several hundred years later, is that, just as Ibn Arabi was claiming to be the Khatam al-Wilaya, which is another way of saying the Mahdi, right? And just as at the very beginning of the Fusus Al Hikam, the Fusus Al Hikam is given to Ibn Arabi by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In the Qayyam al-Asma, we find the exact same dynamic occurring with the Bab, where the Qayyam al-Asma, the commentary in the Surah of Joseph, is given to him by the hidden Imam, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari. So such that, just as with the Quran, the alter ego or the angel of revelation of the Quran is the Archangel Gabriel for the Quran. For the Fusus Al Hikam, it is the Prophet Muhammad himself for Ibn Arabi. And for the Bab, it is the 12th Imam, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari. So these are the sorts of issues that at least for me, have been very eminent issues in understanding this text. And most of all, with Ibn Arabi, anyone who gets into any level of mystical philosophy, the questions that immediately always come up are, for example, the question of the one and the many. Okay, how can we talk about God even when we're reading, for example, condemnatory verses in the Quran, where the enemies of the Prophet and the enemies of all the saints and prophets that have gone have been roundly condemned? There's a notion of good and evil, the saved and the damned. How do we reconcile these sorts of theological questions with the question of the one and the many? And Ibn Arabi's Fusus Al Hikam and all his writings, and especially his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, strive to resolve these sorts of questions. Now, unfortunately, after Ibn Arabi, and especially with the commentary tradition that crops after him, beginning with his son-in-law and godson, Sadruddin Qunawi, there's a very dry, technical, and almost philosophical approach to the question of the one and the many, which gets labeled by the term wahdat al-wujud, the unity of being, which modern philosophical terminology has rendered as either pantheism or monism. But when you read Ibn Arabi himself, he never uses that term at all. In fact, if he uses the term in a technical sense, it isn't wahdat al-wujud, but wahdat al-mahda, which means the absolute unity. And that wahdat al-mahda does not apply to the relation of creation with the creator in an absolute sense, but it refers to the relation of the creator with himself. So wahdat al-mahda, or wahdat al-wujud, is the term that is coined by the later generation, refers to the being of God. So it's not talking about all things that proceed from God, albeit from the perspective of the philosophy of Ibn Arabi, when we are dealing with this very unique form of standpoint epistemology, where a statement is true based on the perspective or the standpoint of the perceiver of what is being seen. When it's looked at from that perspective, then on one level we can say, for example, that there is an uninterrupted connection between creation and its creator, because if to say otherwise is then to suggest the contradiction, the problem that in creation there are vacuums where the presence of God does not exist, and then that produces a whole range of logical and philosophical problems, whose the only way that you could then resolve it is to basically de-absolutize the Godhead, which for us, coming from the tradition that we come from, is a problematic thing. Allah is the absolute, or as Ibn Arabi calls him, wujud al-mutlaq, the absolute existence. So these are the questions that then the Fusus Al Hikam, in a didactic way, but in a also poetic didactic way, using the Quran and Hadith as its points of departure, but with a very radical exegetical or interpretive method, seeks to resolve. So this is one of the reasons why I mentioned in that post that I want to move away from the commentary tradition, because even though this commentary tradition is great, and and people who have the time should read these books, these commentaries on the Fusus Al Hikam, they can obscure. If you engage with Ibn Arabi with himself, that you take this text, and Ibn Arabi here is the teacher, and he's trying to convey to you the thought about what he has seen in that vision that he claims that he had of the Prophet Muhammad, who gave him that book. And even this has a very specific meaning that we'll try to unpack in the very first session of this course. What does that actually mean? That Ibn Arabi witnessed, had a vision of the Prophet himself, in a dream. Was it really the Prophet Muhammad he saw in the vision? And does even that question matter, whether it was the Prophet Muhammad or not the Prophet Muhammad, from the vantage point, from the standpoint of epistemology from which Ibn Arabi is speaking? And these are questions, the sort of questions that are very important to people who are on a path, people who are people of faith. How to reconcile these sorts of questions, because iterations of these sorts of questions also occur in the path and in the spiritual wayfaring of anybody who's on a path such as this. After a while you have all kinds of interesting experiences and dreams and whatnot. And so then how to locate this stuff, properly for yourself, how to interpret this, and then how to let that be your guide rather than your veil. Because I have seen this also, and it happens quite frequently, that people have visions and dreams and that sort of thing of this, that, and the other thing. And rather than allowing that for them to bloom and open up to more visions and more revelations and more integration, more spiritual individuation, it traps them in the veil. So they then make a taghut. They make an idol out of it. A text such as this is one of the most wonderful ways, it's sort of a key to allow people to look into the infinity of things, as it were, in the way that Ibn Arabi looks into it, right? Like in the manner in which, in a very radical manner in which he interprets verses of the Quran, and what he actually calls from the meaning of words that are the opposite of what they mean on the outward level sometimes, to then use that for themselves in their own spiritual quest, in their own inner quest to understand the tajalliyat Allah, the theophanies and the self-disclosure of God, which is everything. And one way, for example, one of the keys that was given to me in understanding Ibn Arabi was actually from the Bayan. In one of the gates of the Persian Bayan, which was completed by Wahid Azal, there's a discussion that originates with the Arabic Bayan completed by the Bab, where the question of the affirmers and the deniers is brought up in the greater ontological and soteriological landscape of things. And the way that Wahid Azal deals with this question is beautiful. And immediately, when the first time I read it about 20 plus years ago, it immediately resolved for me a lot of the conundrums that exist in the Fusus Al Hikam and in Ibn Arabi in German. The way he puts it is like this. The divine name al-Hayy, the living, which for Ibn Arabi is the Imam al-Asma, it's the foremost of the divine names. That is what unites the affirmation, the light, and the darkness. Both exist under the canopy or under the shade of this divine name. In other words, the All-High, al-Haq, the truly real, contains both its own affirmation and its own negation. So the way he puts it is beautiful. He says that God is both the revivifier and the killer, taker of life. Yuhyi wa yumitu, which are the two attributes that are several times delineated in the Quran itself. And this is the explanation as to what is the separation between the saved and the damned. The separation is under what aspect of the greater name that they're inhabiting, right? One is under the canopy of the revivifier, al-Muhyid, and the other one, Mumit. And both are united under the greater reality of the divine name, al-Hayy, right? And this resolved this question for me immediately, such that even the damned, or put it another way, paradise and hell both have a single master, which is the All-High. So therefore, the presence of the All-High exists in all phenomena, whether it be positive or negative, right? Now, this doesn't obviate the reality of the negative or the positive on a phenomenal spatio-temporal level, because it has its place within this ontological experience, within this epistemic, tasting, our epistemic tasting of what this reality is. These things are real. The affirmer is the affirmer and the denier is the denier. The positive is the positive, the negative is the negative. But as from a greater totality, from the perspective of al-Haq, these are both presences, or the presence of the All-High inhabits both simultaneously. And this is affirmed in the Bayan itself, which otherwise has an extremely Gnostic take on the dialectics of history and or sacred history. So this resolved for me, what some of this dialogic or dialectic of Ibn Arabi in the Fusus is all about 25 years ago or so now. And since then, the more I have read Ibn Arabi, just like the more I have read the Bab, the more they give up themselves. And especially when one isolates the various Quranic verses and passages that Ibn Arabi quotes in very unconventional ways in the text of the Fusus, and you meditate on these verses themselves and through their various readings, the 7 ahruf, and they give themselves. This exercise itself then becomes a sort of a theophanic exercise. And then you begin to get into Ibn Arabi's own head and begin to understand where he is coming from, you know. So I think these exercises are important, and understanding something like this is important, because from this, then the next step is how to understand the occult. Then how would you interact with the imaginal reality of a jinn? When you have this kind of understanding of the nature of Wahid al-Matta, in the way that Ibn Arabi expresses it, then how is your approach to the jinn? How is your approach to understanding the asma that you're invoking and the angels that you're invoking along with these names, and all of the various procedures that you're following, right? These things are rarely taught anymore. You know, there are people still in the Muslim world, whether in Africa or in the Middle East, who know these things and they transmit these sorts of teaching and they understand these things. But by and large, especially in the West, and much of the modernist and postmodernist landscape of the turuq, these are not taught at all. People are kind of on their, you know, on their own, and the teachers out there, big or small tariqas, are not equipping, because these sorts of things are, in my opinion, on someone who is with someone who's a salik, who's on a spiritual path. These are the mafatih al-ghaib. These are the keys of the unseen, to understand yourself, by, you know, in order to understand your Lord, right? And without these sorts of keys, without, in my opinion, approaching magic is just a form of self-delusion. You're engaging in fantasy and possibly pushing yourself into a form of mental illness because you don't have the context. And even if things happen, or the paranormal suddenly decides to come to your life with a vengeance, you don't have the context, the understanding, the gnosis, to then deal with it properly. And these are the sorts of caveats, the sorts of warnings that masters and schools everywhere have put in place repeatedly about precisely these very things. So the aim with reading the Fusus Al Hikam over a 2-year period very carefully is to be able to glean these tools and to get these sorts of tools to then go out into the world to be a real theurgist, rather than, you know, just aspiring to something, or engaging in a sort of occult Wittgensteinian language game, which a lot of occultists unfortunately do, whether from our tradition or, you know, generally speaking. You know, people were asking me, for example, about the cost. I should mention here, the reason I put a cost in, as I mentioned before to Salman, is that I looked everywhere at platforms that would allow us to do things like screen sharing, recording and good quality, and also extended time periods for recording, and I couldn't find a single one that was adequate for purposes such as this other than Zoom. Unfortunately, since about 18 months ago or so, Zoom has been charging a lot of money. They're no longer a free service as they used to be. So I thought about it. I thought, okay, if I charge people, every person, $1 per session, right, as a combined, as a total course, then it comes to $56. So I basically said, okay, $56 US, because that's how much we're paying Zoom for the entire course. Alhamdulillah, there's a few people now. I have basically, I think a total of 38 people, and no more is a manageable crowd of people. And people, 38 people are usually people who have been commit to staying the course for the 2-year period. And also, what I really insist on with this course is that rather than me pontificating and sitting there in a long 1-hour monologue each week about this text, I want people to read and come back in these sessions, right, where we spent maybe a fraction of the time, maybe the first 5 or 10 minutes, reading the little bit that we had to read, and then the rest of the time for there to be an interaction about people's insights about what they have read, so that then this becomes, in essence, over the 56 sessions that we have, a collective commentary, right, on the Fusus Al Hikam that, inshallah, maybe in the future, I would collate, or other people who are participants can help me collate together, and we would even publish as a text, as a contemporary collective dialogue that, 38 people or however many were engaged in had with the text of the Fusus Al Hikam.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Shaykh. And I'm just in awe, just sitting back and listening to my Shaykh and absorbing the light and the gnosis and love of my peer, Murshid and Shaykh. Shaykh Wahid Azal is absolutely correct. In our world of Islam today, people have no idea how powerful Islam is when it talks about the world of the malakut, the jinns, the angels, of the human realm. People have no idea that Islam inspired so many of the Western esoteric mystery schools and traditions. They just go to the masjid, pray 5 times a day, fast in Ramadan, do their typical external Islam. And when you get into the inner Islam, when you look at the Zahir and Batin, it's a totally different world we're dealing with. And the Prophet alayhi salam and Imam Ali alayhi salam, they have all instructed us that you have to be a seeker of knowledge, you have to be a seeker of light, whether you're from the Sunni tradition or Shia tradition. This is so important because so many tariqas today, they're not equipping their followers with the proper knowledge on how to deal with the world and the realms of existence around you. Ibn Arabi's work is often misunderstood and misinterpreted. Shaykh Wahid Azal, he's doing a service to mankind by making sure that this work is properly attributed and understood the right way. I encourage everyone, people that are my YouTube subscribers, anyone watching this, $56 is nothing because you're doing yourself a service in this. You could just go outside, how expensive everything is these days, grab like maybe 2 or 3 things and you're already $100+ So you're doing yourself a service in terms of the knowledge by giving yourself this gift, this $56, which will go over a period of 2 year time. And you're going to be, it's like a college course on Ibn Arabi. Honestly, this is a college course where you'll be sitting with your fellow students and you'll be critiquing and debating and commentating and learning and reading. This is amazing. I'm so happy the Shaykh is doing this. And even myself looking into Henry Corban and looking into the Bayan and all of these different teachings that are out there. The traditional Muslim, if they want to survive in the upcoming world, they need to know these realities, for the realities changing so much. And I'm just grateful because even with me, I can testify ever since I've been in the Noor FSO and have Shaykh Wahid Azal spiritual gaze in my life. My life's all never been the same. It just went higher and higher and higher to other planes of existence, just flying towards union with the beloved, with the Godhead. So please do yourself this favor. Anyone who's listening and watching, sign up for the Sheikh's course.
And it's not just the Sheikh's course. The Shaykh here is Ibn Arabi, the Shaykh al-Ahmad. And, in essence, we're trying to also presence himself to be amongst us, as it were, to teach us his own text, as it were, as a group collective effort. So, whatever the ilhamat or the nafahat that come from the rohaniyat of Ibn Arabi himself with us. And I've experienced this myself. I mean, my own Murshid claimed to me during my initiation that amongst the things that he transmitted to me was the Khirqa Akbariya that he had received from his own Shaykh. So there were a group of Iranian masters within these sub-tariqas of the Ni'matullah order in Iran and the Qadariya of Iranian Kurdistan, who did claim at least to be in possession of the Khirqa Akbariya. So I technically have this. And it took many years for me to, basically come to a place that, okay, now is the time to basically begin to exposit this text, especially the Fusus Al Hikam. Others are doing great work. For example, one of my university teachers back in the 90s, for only one course though, in one semester in 1993, one of the last semesters I was at the University of New Mexico, is Eric Winkle. He lives in New Mexico too. He lives in Santa Fe, and I really liked the guy. We disagreed on some things, but overall we agreed on a lot of stuff. And he is almost now complete with a full translation of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the Meccan revelation, or Meccan openings, which the Islamic Text Society has published. Unfortunately, the price of these translations are so high that, at least for now, unless they put them out in paperback or if they come up online as PDFs, are just inaccessible. But that, for me, that's not an issue, because I have 5 different editions of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, and several manuscripts, and I've read through all of these, twice at least. So, although I think the Futuhat al-Makkiyah is one of the glues in order to understand an epitome and a condensed text like the Fusus Al Hikam. Nevertheless, the Fusus Al Hikam stands on its own. It's also one of the final pieces of writing before his death, about 13 years after he wrote it. So it is a very important text, and given the number of commentaries that we have, well over 100 commentaries have been written on the Fusus Al Hikam alone. More have probably been written that we don't even know about. So this is an important text. As the Paulist Press used to publish this line of books called the Classics of Western Spirituality. Back in the 80s, they published Ralph Austin's translation, which was the second translation after the French translation of what's his name? I just forgot his name right now. Who wrote a preface to Austin's own translation. This was the first full-length English translation or any European language translation of the Fusus. It is okay translation. There are a few, problems I have with it as a translator myself, but overall, I think it's a pretty decent translation. Channer Dagli, who was a student of Sayyid Hossein Nasr at George Washington University, he did his PhD dissertation for a translation, a new translation of Ibn Arabi's Fusus Al Hikam. That is a very good translation. I also have some questions here and there about certain things that he translates, certain terminology, but overall, if these two translations of the Fusus Al Hikam, I think if they're read together and they're both complete, I think people who don't have access to the Arabic will come away getting a very good picture of what this is about, this text is about, and our discussions and other texts and whatnot that I will give to the group over the course of the 2 years that we'll be doing this course. I think by the time that we end this course, all of us, not just the people who are coming as a blank slate, but everybody, including myself, will come away that much more both intellectually and spiritually enriched in the understanding of a pivotal text and a pivotal figure such as this, the Fusus Al Hikam. Like I mentioned, this text is a revelatory text, just like the Quran is. Now, do with that concept whatever you will. From my point of view, that's not a big deal, but for more orthodox-minded people, this poses a real theological problem. But for the Sufis, it doesn't. So if you want to understand it, in my opinion, existential Islam, the Islam, or how Islam is looked at more as an ontological category rather than an identity, then this is the text to approach to understand what that even means. And it's very interesting that right at the very beginning, in the very preamble, in the exordium to the preamble, Ibn Arabi puts his finger on, very subtly but very succinctly at the same time, on the nerve of the issue, that that there is that everybody is approaching the truth according to their their mazhab or their sect, as it were, right at the very beginning. So this notion that all exoteric religions have about themselves, of being of having the truth and their opponents being bereft of the truth, right, is right there resolved from in my opinion, from the vantage point of a sort of Gnostic or esoteric universalism that Ibn Arabi is advocating. He accepts the differences in the creeds and the religions as a matter of fact, as being part of the ontological function of Kathra, but from the vantage point that he comes, which is a Gnostic and esoteric universal, this is where the perennialism occurs. It can never occur on the level of ecumenical stuff that unfortunately, in my opinion, which is a bit of a circus, ecumenical attempts of trying to create, trying to create bridges between the religions from the outward exoteric level are always doomed to failure, because they are not approaching the question in the correct manner. The correct place to come to this issue is not from an ecumenical perspective, but from the perennial perspective of a Gnostic or esoteric universalism. And Ibn Arabi's Fusus Al Hikam, in my opinion, is one of the ultimate texts on this. Even though, as I said earlier, there are details here and there, outward details and things that he expresses in this book that I disagree with, but that's neither here nor there, because the guiding principle of this text is such that you can discard the nitty-gritty details, the outward details of certain things that Ibn Arabi may say as being historically located and culturally located, but then when you look at the principle guiding it, that becomes the guide of understanding. And these are very important, in my opinion, things for people to internalize, particularly if they're spiritual seekers, and especially in these times, these very tumultuous, chaotic, and deceptive times that we're living in, where the real teachers are becoming fewer and fewer, but the thirsty seekers are becoming more and more and more. So, what can we give? What is the tool? The issue is to give the tools to the seeker, not to get them to go join another cult or cling to the robe of another master without getting anything out of it over a lifetime, but to get the tools themselves to do the wayfaring with themselves. And these tools exist, and this is one of the texts that makes it happen. So once, for example, when you come away after having finished the course on the Fusus Al Hikam, then after 2 years, when you go back and reread the Quran from the perspective of the Fusus Al Hikam, your approach to the Quran from that point forward is very different than what it was before. You're now no longer looking at the Quran or the received opinions of an imam or a theological school as the only valid perspective on reading a particular verse of the Quran. Your perspective is now much more global, much more polyvalent, much more animate. And you take Ibn Arabi very seriously when he quotes the passage where God, every day he's upon some new task. You take this seriously such that even your own understanding of the meaning of the Quran will begin to change from day to day, because then you realize that this text, that revelation has no singularly located meaning. It is endless. And this is one of the things that Ibn Arabi is trying to teach. And it's also behind it then the question of the one and the many that begins the very text of the Fusus Al Hikam, and it's very exordiant.
You know what, Sheikh? That's absolutely correct. And you are right, because in today's world I've seen, we are living in deceptive and chaotic times. And I've seen so many, let's say, teachers of these different groups, or let's say sheikhs of different groups, who are basically misguiding their flock. And you'll have maybe, let's say, there was this one sheikh in a masjid here in America. They were talking about Hindutva persecuting Muslims, and he had a Jesuit priest that came into the mosque to stand with him. And a lot of people started dismissing him right away. Okay, we can't be aligned with that kind of stuff, where this guy is aligning himself with the Jesuits, who are known in their oath to be deceivers, right? Then you have a lot of these people here in America, unfortunately, within the African American community, the Moorish communities, who are misguiding their own people with these different lectures and saying that I'm enlightened or I'm giving you wisdom, but yet they're part of occult and secret societies, which are not only putting their people down, they're putting down humanity as a whole. And it's so unfortunate.
We've talked about this several times. The other problem I have with a lot of the Moors at the moment, I've told them this, is that they're shepherding their own people into the Masonic lodges. And everybody knows what you believe about these guys, and since you left. My problem is that Masonry is basically a front, an esoteric or a cult front, if you want, for the diffusion of white supremacy. And it always has been that way. And whatever high, liberal, lofty ideals they speak, the fact of the matter is that Freemasonry, especially the British Rite of Freemasonry, more than any one of them, has sown chaos wherever it's gone.
No doubt. That's why a lot of the Islamic countries, what they did was they banned these people, because it was not about just being charitable and love and light and God. That they're all full of nonsense. It was about having groups where they could further their spy networks or further their imperialism agenda. That's why wherever the British and the French went, they took Freemasonry with them. So that's the unfortunate truth. And I assure you, in my experiences in my life, I've seen all of these groups. I've exposed all of these groups. Majority of the ones that you have out there teaching today are not who they claim to be. So myself with Shaykh Wahid Azal, this is the reason why Shaykh Wahid Azal is persecuted and shadow banned. He doesn't get the views that he's supposed to, and he doesn't get the recognition that he's supposed to, because the enemies are always suppressing him.
But they've also tripped over themselves over the last 2 years, and their suppression efforts have kind of dwindled because they've not gone anywhere. But the thing is this, I will say this especially to Muslims who look at the Lodge, is that why do you need morals and dogma if you have the Fusus Al Hikam? I mean, Morals and Dogma is a great book. There's some great Kabbalistic stuff in that.
Yes.
But, you take the Fusus and compare it to Morals and Dogma. I mean, there is no competition here. The Fusus wins every single time, hands down. And there is also a genuine honesty and authenticity to what Ibn Arabi is saying versus to what Pike is saying.
Yes.
Pike was also a Klansman, for people who forget. So this rancid history of white supremacy has been connected to the Lodge and to Freemasonry in North America and also in mainland Europe for a long time. And it hasn't really produced anything, Initiation or the truths of initiation, cannot be communicated and therefore are secret, right? So, example, a novice who takes hand with the Shaykh in a Sufi order is often told, for example, the dhikr I am transmitting to you is yours. You're never to reveal it to anybody. This is your secret. But this means something else than the secrecy of secret orders like Freemasonry. Is something else completely different. Yeah. That's not the same thing. But the initiation rite itself, everything associated was very public, and most Sufi orders in the Muslim world. There's nothing secret about it. And Sufi tariqas, at least traditionally before the modern period, before the age of the Salafists and the Wahhabis, etc., Sufi orders were not only about, basically pushing people to get the initiation, they were also doing things for their communities. So the kitchens, the hospices for the poor, those who were taking care of the poor and needy in society were usually coming out of the tekkes, the khanaqahs and the zawiyas, or the mosques that were Sufi oriented in those times. So it was a center of a society. It was the Salvation Army. It was the your local soup kitchen, and also there was a sheikh there who was then initiating murids into the higher mysteries. This doesn't exist in Freemasonry. How many lodges are you aware of that are doing public service as the lodge? Anywhere.
See, that's the thing, Sheikh. Nowhere, and that's what turns many people away eventually. Most people do not know that England still possesses that power. There's no Grand Lodge in the world, in the modern world, that is recognized as an official authority until England recognizes them. So the British, they still maintain their power and supremacy secretly and covertly. Even my home country of Pakistan, Imran Khan came into power. Oh, he wasn't going by their plan. They kicked him right out. And the British groomed Sharif family came right in. The Zardari, the Bhutto family, they came and took over. So a lot of these colonies that the British and the French controlled, even to this day, are not free. And they use Freemasonry as a tool in these institutions and these countries to control. And I remember one time I did a video on Freemasonry in Pakistan. And on the United Grand Lodge of England's website, they had a number of the secretary for the District Grand Lodge of Pakistan, which was exiled back to England. And as soon as I made that video, I think a week later, they took that number down. Just like how the Grand Lodge of Iran is exiled in Massachusetts and California. Yeah. They removed that information. These people are deceivers, and they always have something to hide.
Yeah, unfortunately, and this is the thing, unless the Moors, in my opinion, started their own lodge, a Moorish lodge that was only Moorish, not associated with, whether the British, Scottish, or, Grand Rite of the Orient or any of this, their own Moorish lodge. That's one thing.
They do have that. And, it's funny because Any Grand Lodge or lodge that is not controlled by the British or the French or not recognize them, they consider them illegal and clandestine. Like, who gave them the authority to be the originators in the first place? All these traditions they stole from Persia, from Iran, from the East, from China, from Sufism. They stole all of this stuff from there.
I mean, the various iterations of people who call themselves Rosicrucian orders, I can handle, because at least with Rosicrucianism, there's a bit of honesty about where a lot of this stuff came from, but not with Masonry, you know. And I look, and I am someone who has been invited to join the lodge repeatedly, whether by Scottish Rite, British Rite, or even the Grand Rite of the Orient itself, and also the Martinists. And I have refused these people every single time, because they've never been able to adequately, answer a question for me. Why would I require a Masonic initiation if I already have one that is an authentic transmission? What is the purpose of this? Unless
honestly, Sheikh, a lot of these groups that I've seen, they're all infiltrated and compromised. A lot of these guys are either OTO or they belong to other covert and secret orders, and they use Freemasonry as a cover and as a shield, from my understanding. And they bring that egregore into the lodge, which then affects the other members as well. Like, I've been in this, I used to be in the fraternity for 8 years. I've experienced it in America, in England, and I resigned in good standing, for the record, before these people could try to say that, oh, he got suspended or he got expelled, because I could sense the evil from these people, that at the very top of the pyramid, it's nothing but the devil indeed. It's a lot of deception that is there. And our traditions of Islam and Sufism, the Bayan, it already gives us that. So why go to the white man who stole your stuff and repackaged it and is now trying to sell it back to you? You don't need that. Unfortunately, many of our African American brothers and the Moors, they become subservient and participants of that agenda and are dragging their own people down, which is why I'm so glad we have someone like Shaykh Wahid Azal who's doing what he's doing.
Let's see where it all goes, inshallah, khair, as they say. Anyway, this is the thing. This is the course. If you're interested, please subscribe. I will begin the first session of it on Saturday, the 19th, my time, which in the Northern Hemisphere, at least in the United States, will be late day or evening of the 18th, Friday. And depending on how many people show up on the first session, we will determine whether we will keep that same time or we will push another time. But inshallah, I'm looking at once a week, where we read half a chapter of the Fusus, these 27 chapters, all on. The preamble will be the first, and about probably a couple of days before we start the first session, there's a Telegram group associated, and I'll basically tell people what to read, before the first session, which will basically be the intros and the preamble to the two translations of the Fusus, and just we come and we discuss that, and then questions and answers and all of that, and commentaries and people's insights about what they specifically read. And then this is the pattern that we will follow for the next 55 sessions after that. And in 2 years we will have quite a lot of substantial material. All of these sessions will be recorded, as I said, and the recordings will only be available to those who are participant, who have enrolled in the course, and who have, because of time differences between here and wherever they may be in the world, have not been able to see that particular session. So they will have access to these videos of these sessions, and then they can follow the itinerary of the reading themselves. And whenever they can participate. Or if they are whether for work reasons or whatever reasons, they're incapable of participating at certain hours, I am always available outside of the scope of the sessions itself to answer any questions they may have about the text and readings, and that's so even to engage one-on-one with these people over that. So that's also what you may be paying for if you're unable, to keep those times. So you have access to the videos, and you have access to me where this particular text is concerned.
And I think anyone who's listening who is a true seeker and a knower of gnosis and true knowledge should definitely sign up for this course. And Sheikh, for anyone that wants to get in touch with you or sign up for this course, how do you recommend the process to do so?
Well, on the blog, I've put the information up there, so you can pay either via PayPal through the email I have given, or if that doesn't work for you, you can write to me and we can do a direct deposit.
And everything the Sheikh has mentioned, I'll put all of the links in the description below. And I'm super excited for this, and I encourage everyone, please sign up for this course and help support this great work, because as we discussed everything in this podcast so far, there's so much deception and misinterpretation by people deliberately, so people don't go to the correct knowledge and understanding of what any of this is about. So I'm grateful to Shaykh Wahid Azal, my peer, my murshid, my sheikh, and my friend, for all that he does, not only for me, but for humanity in general. And people like him are um, rarely there in today's world. And it's because of people like him our world is still surviving. And God is having mercy on all of us, as he is she whom God shall make manifest. So I'm always grateful to the Sheikh. And it is truly, truly a privilege, honestly.
Inshallah khair, as they say. So we'll just leave it at that for now, and hope to see some smiley faces in the course come on the 19th or 18th.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Yeah.
So until we join Sheikh Wahid Azal again in the future for part 23, wa alaikum.
Alaikum.